Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to review the season finale of Star Trek Discovery Season 3, the 13th episode of the season, That Hope Is You, Part 2. So the premise of this episode, of course, is that it picks up where the last episode left off, with the Discovery in the hands of Osiris people, and Michael and the crew trying to take the ship back, while Dr. Culber and Saru were trapped on the Dilithium planet, or not trapped, but left behind on the Dilithium planet, and in need of rescue before they died from radiation poisoning. So they are joined early in this episode by Adira, who smuggled her way onto Book's ship as he was flying through the nebula in the previous episode. And shortly after she arrives, they arrive on the planet and enter into the simulation and finds Saru and Dr. Culber. Gray walks up to them, and it turns out that Saru and Culber can see him in addition to Adira being able to see him. And either Culber or Saru says, "Gray, hello, the Holo program recognizes you." And I was like, what? How? He's like a figment of Adira's imagination. Like, not her imagination, I guess, not their imagination. I guess he lives in their head somehow as a stored memory, kind of like Spock's Katra, maybe. And so Adira is able to see him in front of them, like for real, as if he were there, which is goofy enough because he's dead. And now, because Adira is in the holoprogram, Gray is physically manifested not only for them to see, but for everybody to see. What? It doesn't make any sense. And he's manifested as a hologram. Like, what? That doesn't make a lick of sense. And it's going to get worse, because at the end of the episode, I think Culber says to Adira, "We'll find a way to make it so he can manifest physically." Like, what? So this is a dead person whose consciousness, in a way, resides inside Adira because they have the symbiont, and they're going to somehow turn that into a physical being. Like, never mind that he actually appears in front of her. Because at first I was like, okay, they're showing him, appears in front of them. At first I was like, okay, the producers are showing him to us to get across the idea that Adira sees him in their mind's eye, like, or imagines him there while they are communicating with him internally. And when I say him, I mean a remnant of his consciousness. And I was like, okay, that's it's a television trope. You do that kind of thing, so the audience to like know what's going on by seeing it visually, but they don't really see him like in the story, but they do. And so now a holographic program can see them, and they're going to make it so that everybody can see them, essentially, or him, essentially resurrecting him. What? It's insane. I don't understand it. Later in the episode, because Stamets has now been ejected from Discovery, Osyraa has no way to use the spore drive. So she just says in the middle of her shenanigans to Michael or whatever, she said, I'm not worried. I'll find a way to make the spore drive work. And I just thought that was hilarious because one of the main arguments that Discovery stands have been using to deflect the suggestion from those of us who realize that it's really bad, that this series makes Voyager entirely stupid, renders it entirely stupid, because the idea that no one in the Delta Quadrant had ever discovered the mycelial network and figured out a way to use it, in the ensuing 100 years, is absurd. Is always, well, even if they had discovered it, they would never have been able to operate it because the only way that works is with tardigrades, and they would have to have had tardigrades, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they use that same argument to deflect the point that everything that comes after Discovery is kind of silly to a certain extent because no other species is using the mycelial network. And I always would say to them, but come on, they couldn't have figured out some way to use it. We're supposed to believe that there's no other way to use it and that no one would have figured it out. And here the writers are having Osyraa say, I think I can find a way to make it work. Now, she doesn't actually find a way to make it work. But the idea that that a way to be able to find it to work, exists is now part of the show. And it's just so bad. Because the crew doesn't say, no, you won't. You know what I mean? Like, I just, and there's more on this as we get further in the episode. At one point, the Navarians show up. Yay! We never get to see them. Don't get to see them. Don't get to see Michael's mother. We don't get to see the Shat Bajash, whatever those nuns are called. We don't get to see. Oh, until the end. The one Vulcan president lady shows up at the end. Then someone tells Michael, you can't, this is the bad guy, Osyraa's muscle guy, tells Michael, this is a no-win situation. And she says, I don't believe in those. She doesn't believe in the no-win situation. But of course, they couldn't even get that right because, of course, the phrase is no-win scenario. Later on, in her efforts to take over the ship, because she gets away from Osyraa and she's still trying to take the ship back, she broadcasts a message to remind Tilly of something that happened between them when Tilly first showed up, or when Michael first showed up on Discovery. And apparently it was something that led to Tilly hiding away inside a warp nacelle. Now, I'm not the best person at the science of Star Trek, like how nacelles work and all that stuff, but I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want to be in a nacelle while it's in operation. So I don't know what that was about. And then, of course, they proceed to take the ship back by sending Oa into the nacelle while the ship is at warp. Someone might have to tell me if that makes any sense, but I just thought it was weird. One cool thing about this episode was Doug Jones, and I guess the last episode too. I didn't really realize it until this episode, but Doug Jones, of course, is out of his makeup for these last two episodes, and it really was great to see him, act without the makeup on. You get to see his actual face, emoting and so forth underneath the makeup, and it was really cool. He really is a talented actor. He can do it without the prosthetics, and is good at it. So that was cool, to see. Then there's a scene where they try to explain to each other how it is that Su'Kal caused the burn. And it pains me to even say this. Basically, they sputtered a bunch of bullshit that amounts to Su'Kal is, because of the unique circumstances of where he was born and where he grew up, is able to affect like the entirety of the planet, which is composed, I guess, of dilithium. When he screams or cries in such a way that his cry or scream resonates like a shockwave. And not only courses through the whole planet, but outward from the planet through subspace to affect all dilithium everywhere. Because, ladies and gentlemen, dilithium has a subspace component. What? What the fuck is that? Again, I'm not one of those people that's really up on the science of how dilithium works and warp drive works. I don't really understand subspace even, but of course they've never said this before, to my recollection. And if dilithium is connected to subspace, why do I feel like that would somehow disrupt the ability of a starship to maintain a warp bubble? Like that it would interfere, like how a microwave interferes with a pacemaker, you know what I mean? Or at least used to 30 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like how magnetic energy will mess with an electronic component. I may have to look this up, but that struck me as just problematic. But forgetting that, what are they talking? Like this? Like what? I know it's Star Trek and I know it's sci-fi, and I know on the original series they came up with some wacky shit, but like I don't remember them coming up with goofy shit like this. This is another one of those like time crystal deals. Time crystals exist, apparently, and dilithium apparently has a subspace component, and there's a dilithium It just reminded me of Doctor Who. Like, I love Doctor Who, so don't get me wrong. And one of the things I love about Doctor Who is they just make shit up, right? This is just one of the things I loved about Doctor Who when I started watching it, in modern Doctor Who with the Ninth Doctor. They're not, I mean, they are to a certain extent, but they're not really tied to this huge, enormous universe of, certain things just being a certain way and you can't go outside. They're not boxed in the way Star Trek is. Their stories, they tend to write whatever the hell they want and they don't explain it. And you just go, oh, okay, that's a thing. Whatever they just said, that's a thing in the universe. And you just accept it because they're constantly coming up with new stuff. That's what Doctor Who is, new, weird, out of this world stuff, and you just nod and go, oh, okay, cool. But it's like these writers for Discovery, and I haven't been able to put my finger on it until now, but for a long time, I've felt this about the writers. Like, they just, like, what are they doing? And I've kind of figured it out. They think they're writing for Doctor Who. Because this is the kind of shit that you would see on Doctor Who. The writing on the show is way more like the writing on Doctor Who than it's ever been on Star Trek. And I don't like it. I like Doctor Who. I don't like it on Star Trek. I like my Star Trek to not be goofy. Doctor Who can be goofy, come up with goofy shit like this. Star Trek's not supposed to. Anyway. Now there's a scene where Osira has cut off the oxygen on the lower decks of the ship. And so Tilly and Oa and Detmer and those folks are running out of oxygen. They're trying to get to the nacelle. But Oa announces that she can do a little better in low oxygen environments because when she was a kid, she had learned by like the age of 10 or whatever to hold her breath underwater, you know, when she would go hunting for food or whatever, for 10 minutes, which is 5 times as long as the average human. So, and she's human. So I'm having trouble buying that. And even if I buy that, what I want to know is, how does her ability to hold her breath for a long time help her survive longer in a low oxygen environment when she is breathing? Again, I'm not a doctor, but those two things don't seem to correlate to me. Like, I don't know, unless the whole key is when you're holding your breath for that long, you've trained your body to consume less oxygen. So a smaller amount of oxygen lasts you longer before you get into hypoxia or whatever. But like, that makes sense if you're holding your breath. How do you do that when you're breathing? Like, is she always using less oxygen? You know what I'm saying? Like, wouldn't she be the best athlete in the world? You know what I mean? Like, I just thought that was stupid. At one point, so what they do is they disrupt the nacelle, the connection between the nacelle and the ship, so that knocks the ship out of warp. And at that point, and I don't know why she didn't do this from the beginning, but Osira says, have the Viridian, you know, get a tractor beam on Discovery and bring it inside. I don't want to lose this ship. So, like, why didn't they do that immediately? And I don't. I mean, immediately they wanted to sneak into the Federation headquarters there or whatever. But once they left, why didn't they do that immediately? Like, why would you leave yourself outside another ship if you could, you know what I mean? Like, what? I don't know. But anyway, the Viridian is apparently very big and can suck a ship in real quick because it took like 2 seconds. So Michael retakes the ship by resetting the computer from the data core, and she tells Oa and everybody that the ship is now back on its original OS. They don't tell you later whether, you know, operating system. They don't tell you later whether or not they switch back to the upgraded OS. So we're gonna have to see what happens next season, but keep an eye on that. Then of course Tilly tells Michael once they retake the bridge, no, Michael, you be in charge. We need you to lead us. Like, what? Saru made you first officer. Yes, Michael was gone from the ship while you were in command. But the point of that act on his behalf was for you, Tilly, to be in command when he wasn't there, even if Michael was. So why would you now just automatically say, well, no, you know, she took the job, right? And now why would you, Tilly, turn around and just say, no, we need you to lead us, Michael? Well, we know why. Because she's the, you know, savior of everything. I don't want to use someone else's catchphrase, but you know the phrase. Bestest ever. I'm hearing it in my head. So it's just, ridiculous. Ridiculous. But Tilly being made first officer was equally ridiculous. So it's like a cavalcade of ridiculous on this show. Then, because she ejected the warp core, Michael had to eject the warp core in order to escape the Viridian, to blow up the Viridian from inside and then jump out just as it was I don't understand it now that I'm thinking about it. But they figure out a way, like Osyraa was saying, to use the spore drive without Stamets. And this is how they did it. Because Book is an empath who communicates with animals, he is able to somehow communicate with the mycelial network the same way that a tardigrade would, or that Stamets does with tardigrade DNA inside of him. I don't see the connection there. Maybe I have to watch the episode again. Maybe someone can explain it to me. But what the fuck is that? It's more Doctor Who writing. It's more Doctor Who nonsense. It's called pulling shit out of your ass and just saying that it is, and it is. Which again is fine on Doctor Who because that's how Doctor Who is. They just make shit up and that's it. But this is Star Trek. You can't just write the stories that way. You can't just say, oh, fire doesn't burn people anymore. Why? Because we say so. No. So, anyway, if that's true, he can now jump the ship out of the Viridian using the mycelial network. Why do they need to eject the warp core in order to escape? And keep in mind, that's what the reason they gave. They're not doing it so they can blow up the Viridian and defeat their enemy. They're doing it to get out of the Viridian, Osyraa's ship. Just didn't make sense to me. I do want to say that both Gray and Adira looked great as other species, as members of other species when they were made over by the Holo program on the Kelpian ship. They did look really good. Gray was made to look like a Vulcan. And Adira was made to look like, I think, whatever species Poe is, that character from the planet that they call Ice Cream Girl, who figured out a way to recrystallize dilithium, which everyone has apparently forgotten about, as we may have discussed before. But they looked great, both of them. But anyway, of course, now the episode comes to a rapid conclusion, and Michael does a voiceover explaining that the chain fractured without Osyraa, which doesn't make any sense to me, because, it makes it sound like one leader was responsible for the whole thing, and without them, it just fell apart. It doesn't really happen. I don't know. Apparently, it happened with the Emerald Chain. What would have been more interesting is if they had said the Emerald Chain is now run by the wheelchair guy, and the agreement that they wanted to enact with the Federation is going to be enacted, and we're going to have a trade relationship with it. That would have been more Star Trek, and that would have been really cool. Especially going forward in the fourth season, it would have been something that they could have shown the growing pains of, and that could have added a cool element to all of the stories to see the Federation working with the Emerald Chain. Nope, the Emerald Chain fell apart, and that's the end of it. Really stupid. Then they go through this sequence where Michael goes to talk to the Admiral after explaining in the voiceover that Saru had gone back to, is it Kaminar, with Su'Kal to help reintegrate him into Kelpian society. And she sees the guy from the first episode of the season that had been waiting 40 million years for someone from the Federation to come and say hello to him. And he's got on a spiffy new uniform, and she has a brief scene with him, and I thought it was pretty cool. Then she has a scene with the Admiral where the Admiral explains, you're like an insubordinate hothead that doesn't follow the chain of command like ever. But I've come to see that that's a pretty cool thing about you. And why I think that is because my daughter doesn't write down numbers when she does math. She draws pictures of things. As in, Joe has 4 apples. She just draws 4 apples, doesn't draw a number 4 to figure it out. She just does it a different way. And you do things a different way, so you're cool. And we're going to make you Captain of Discovery. Not reinstate you to First Officer and appoint a new captain. We're going to make you Captain of Discovery. I wasn't buying the flip-flop, people. And not only that, but when Discovery was announced, like in 2016, 2017, one of the features of it was supposed to be that, hey, we're doing something different. This show's not going to be about the captain. The captain's not going to be the focus of the show. It's going to be this first officer character. And they've maintained that by rotating out the captain constantly so that you never get this same captain that becomes the focus. But now they're going to do that. They're going to have the same captain become the focus. I mean, theoretically, that's how it's looking. So she's promoted to the rank of captain. She's captain of the Discovery now, and into the 4th season we go. Okay. We'll have to see how that goes. But it's almost like an admission by them that their premise doesn't work. Their premise of, okay, we're not going to do Star Trek in the traditional way where the captain is the focus, and the first officer is like secondary to that, or their relationship with the same captain over a period of time is the crux of the show. We're not going to do that. We're going to do, a different thing where the first officer is the focus. But now they're not doing that. Like, why? Did you figure out it doesn't fucking work? That could be why. But anyway, that's where they're at. It was very cool to see the crew in the new uniforms. I don't really love the new uniforms yet. They're a huge departure from anything we've seen before, at least on the small screen. They are most like, I want to say, the uniforms from the original series movies, because they're a jacket and pants. Of course, the Discovery uniforms have been that, but they were the same color, not red and black. They were blue from head to toe, with the rank only, the department only, signified by the color of the rings around their arm, their arms or shoulders or whatever. I don't know. But I definitely like these uniforms better than those. And they're a huge departure, like I was saying, from anything that's been on any of the shows. So I'm going to get used to them. I don't hate them. I'm just not used to them because the rank pips and everything are even different. They're inside, rectangles, which we saw kind of for the Admirals on TNG, but on this, it's for everyone. They're rectangles or parallelogram shaped or whatever, rank pins. So I don't know. We'll see if I get used to the new uniforms. But you got to give it to them. They definitely came up with something all their own for that. So we'll see more of the uniforms in the future. I don't know why they didn't put them on immediately. Like, you're back in the fold now. Let's change the uniform. No, they let them keep the old uniforms for however long this whole business of solving the burn went. Didn't make sense to me. Another thing that didn't make sense about the uniforms is they gave one to Adira. Why? Especially if you're not giving one to Book. Why? Why does Adira get a uniform? Maybe because she was part of the Earth Defense Force. So like she just translated that. I'm sorry, they just translated that experience into a Starfleet rank, or were able to do that, I guess, or Starfleet decided to do that for her, that for them. Excuse me. Uh, that's probably going to be what they say if they say anything to explain it. Now that I think of it, but again, they're not explaining it so far, as is their way of not explaining things. I did think that this particular episode was a good episode of television. And really, the last episode as well was a good episode of sci-fi television. But as I've been saying, it's, in this review, it's really more like Doctor Who. It's more like Doctor Who, or more like a completely new sci-fi property than it is like Star Trek. And I don't like it. It doesn't work for me. That they just make shit up as they go, and that's just how it is. Because we wrote it, the words on the paper. Now, again, that works in Doctor Who, and that's why I like Doctor Who. Because it's outside the box. It's not constrained by the same kind of rules that Star Trek is. You know what I'm saying? It's its own thing. It does whatever the hell it wants, and you take off your thinking hat and you go with it. And that's Doctor Who. Like, just one example. On Doctor Who, there's a thing called psychic paper, that when the doctor holds it up, people see whatever the doctor says is on it. Why? I don't know. It just is. That's Doctor Who. That wouldn't work on Star Trek. But they tried that shit even on Picard. What's this device? Oh, it's a thing that if you think about it real hard, it'll fix whatever you need it to fix. What? They don't do that on Star Trek, or at least they didn't used to. Now they do. That's what this CBS verse, or it's not the JJ verse, it's the Kurtzman verse, whatever it is, version of Star Trek is. It's this, just make shit up as you go. And there's this funny song, I think it's, I don't remember who does it, but it's about Star Trek is just the adventures of the USS Make Shit Up, because they make shit up like dilithium and warp bubble and all the techno babble, but it's consistent, at least from Next Gen on, if not prior to that. And they operate within a box, and they adhere to rules that they've established for the most part within all the shows that, starting with the original series, more so than not, even though the original series was a little wibbly wobbly with the rules because they were establishing it. But Next Gen, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, they all stayed within the rules. And this show doesn't do that. It just makes shit up like it's Doctor Who. I wish they would stop doing that. I really do. Also, I want to note they never did address the whole thing about quantum singularity travel. They never addressed why they couldn't have just switched over from dilithium to a quantum singularity system like the Romulans had used in the Next Gen era. They never addressed it. And to me, I find that unacceptable. I really do. And it's like, the arguments I would have with people who really love the show were always, they didn't explain this, they didn't explain that. And what I would always hear is, they will, trust them. They know what they're doing. No, they never explained it. And I knew they wouldn't. Something else they didn't explain. Why in 125 years or 100 years, 125 years since the burn started, why was no one able to figure out what Michael figured out in a few weeks or a few months? Using the same resource. Well, they had the discovery and they could jump from here to there in really, in an instant, where they couldn't do that. But over 125 years, you're telling me they couldn't have traveled where she traveled and gathered the information that she gathered? And amassed the resources that she amassed to figure it out. I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it. And again, it goes to this, like, you're just supposed to accept that that makes sense. Why? Because they wrote it on the script. And it would be one thing if they had a conversation about it and came up with some bullshit in the dialogue to explain why she was able to do it and they weren't. But they don't even do that. They don't even give you the bullshit. You're just supposed to sit there and not ask the question, I guess. I think this season was the weakest season of the three, as I said in my review of the penultimate episode of this season. I really do. I think in the beginning of the season, they did a couple of things. The first couple of episodes were more like Star Trek than any other Discovery had been before. They got a couple of things right when they did the whole business with Georgiou's exit. But this season has been the weakest season of all. All three of the seasons of Discovery. They came up with a stupid dilemma that doesn't make sense. They came up with a stupid explanation for how the dilemma came to be that doesn't make sense. And they resolved it in a couple of weeks or months, even though it couldn't have been resolved. It wasn't resolved in the preceding 125 years or 100 years or whatever. And I don't know, maybe we'll see the impact of it later, like when the Federation starts to get back together, we'll see more of the impact of how not having the Federation really affected the Alpha Quadrant. But I doubt it. And that just would have made a much more interesting story. Like, the Federation fell apart. You want to solve, the Federation fell apart and you want to fix that. Cool. So let's have a season about that. But don't make the reason this one event that happened cataclysmically and just destroyed the Federation all at once. Have a story that explains why, the Federation got too big for itself. It could no longer serve the member worlds well because it was this monolith and this giant, thing, and it got ahead of itself or full of itself, or it lost the thread somewhere and could no longer really meet the needs of the member worlds, and it led to fractures between the various core groups of the Federation, and over time it just sort of fell apart. And we have to try to work to solve those differences because we think having a Federation is really the best thing for the quadrant. No, it was one stupid event that had a cascade effect of immediately destroying it. And now we're going to just focus the whole season on solving that one problem. Like I said, maybe next season they'll focus more on putting together the Federation, and we'll get to see all of that, the effects of the burn, examined more closely. And we'll get that story, of the hard work of rebuilding the Federation next season, as opposed to the story we got this season. The story we got this season, which was just, let's figure out why the burn happened and undo it. Which of course they do, right? It's not just that they figure it out. They found a dilithium planet and they're going to undo the burn. Not let's shift to a new way of doing things. Let's just go back to the old way because we found Miracle Planet. And when they had an opportunity to do something else, they have an opportunity to do something else again. So if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you think, okay, maybe they will. But you know what? They won't. When the new season comes back, we're going to get a voiceover from Michael, and she's going to say, it's been a hard 12 weeks, or it's been a hard 6 months, or it's been a hard 2 years, but damn it, we've reconstituted the Federation almost back to the way it was before the burn. And so we exist once again in a galaxy, in a quadrant where the Federation is it. And now we're going to go off on our adventures. That's what you're going to see. Why? Because these writers can't do the hard work. They come up with these big ideas, but the big ideas there's no scaffolding, right? They just show you the outside of the building. They don't show you the bones. And it's infuriating. And I think that's what we're going to get next season again. I hope I'm wrong. Don't think I am. Anyway, it was good to see Book sticking around. I like the character. So I'll be glad to see him next season. And, I wonder now what's going to be happen with Saru. So Michael's captain. Is Saru ever going to come back? If he does, is he going to get a different ship? And are we going to see him on his ship interacting with the Discovery? Is he going to get a position at Starfleet headquarters? Because that could be interesting. Or is he out? Is Doug Jones out? I think that would be a huge mistake. But we have to wait and see. I want to see more of Admiral Vance. I thought he was great. People speculated, during the season, he's going to turn out to be a bad guy, an enemy of the Federation. But they didn't do that. He's what he appears to be, straight shooter. And he does a good job, Admiral Vance, of being the head of the Federation, the admiral in charge of the Starfleet, anyway. And the actor is excellent. So I look forward to seeing Admiral Vance next season. I'm just sad that this is the state of Star Trek these days, that they've had 3 seasons to get it right, and they're still screwing it up. Let's see what happens next season. So that's all I wanted to say about this episode and the season. I will be back with a new video when there's something to talk about going on in the entertainment world. Until then, my friends, peace and a long life.